It's one of the most extraordinary moments in Britain's history. Prime Minister Boris Johnson refusing calls from his own cabinet to resign. Nine's Brett McLeod is outside the Prime Minister's residence. Brett, the Queen could be dragged into this mess.
Yeah, this is the site of one of the highest wind speeds ever recorded by man.
Arson could be the cause of a fire at the Sydney home of controversial comedian, commentator and YouTuber Friendly Geordies.
Supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Hello, and welcome to take 2 of episode 16 of the Fence Sitters podcast. We did record already an intro, but the computer crashed and it was a whole thing, so whatever. Just to add to our kind of low energy today, we are both very tired from doing a little bit of traveling. I was just camping. Will's about to go camping. He's just been at a bit of a talk from someone. I'm sure he'll tell us all about that in a sec. This week, we're going to be going into the Republican debates. You know, who did well, who do you think has actually got a shot up against Trump to become a favorite candidate. And then we're going to go a little bit into some Ukraine news from Will. He's done some research. And then to finish off something a little bit more lighthearted this week, we're going to be talking about how we got into politics, our sort of political influences, and, you know, what books or, you know, documentaries or even YouTube channels or whatnot we might recommend to someone that's looking to get into things. But before we get into that, Will, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. And apologies to the audience, but my vocal tone is quite lowered because it's currently 7 o'clock in the morning here in Manchester, and I'm situated in my room in my Airbnb right next to the lady who owns the place, and I think I've already woken her up about an hour ago with my alarm, which didn't really wake me up. So, you know, failures on both ends. But yeah, we're both pretty tired.
Yeah.
I don't think Tiago got much sleep because of a storm last night, and
Yeah.
then I was up until about 12:30 because of the speaking event, and then I had a massive glass of red wine just to talk myself at the end.
Oh boy.
So I'm pretty shattered, and then was driving 4 hours yesterday, and will be driving 4 hours again today, down to Buckinghamshire. So I'm currently in Manchester for the event, and then I'll be driving down to Buckinghamshire tomorrow for some more camping, and then after about 5 days there, I'll be going. You got Buckinghamshire here, and then you've got another county called Hertfordshire, and I'll be going there. And this is for a very interesting event, Tiago, which I actually want your thoughts on.
Mm-hmm.
So a few weeks ago now, I got an email from the Aberdeen University Conservative Association about this event called Prometheus on Campus,
Mm-hmm.
and which sounds very odd, but pretty much they claim to be, it's this organization, Prometheus on Campus, and they claim to be this UK-based charity which promotes free thinking and liberal ideas, and, you know, debate upon university campuses.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was looking at their website, and you know, first off, I heard about it through the Aberdeen Uni Conservatives, and from their website, they seem to be kind of like a centre-right, pushing back against the woke, you know, influence on university campuses.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're doing this 3-day course in Hertfordshire, and it's politics, it's philosophy, it's art, and there's debating, and there's leadership development, and all these different things. And yeah, I don't really know what I've signed up to, because it's in this big kind of old English mansion, and you get, like, you know, you pretty much stay in the hotel for free. You get all of your food covered for free, and we had to do like menu selections, and it was it was like baked cheddar and steamed leek tart for starters, and like creme brulee for desserts, and all these
Oh,
different
boy.
things. And to top it all off, I was asking because I thought, well, how posh is this thing actually going to be? Like, what should I probably wear for dinner and whatnot? So I sent them an email, and they were like, yeah, in the evenings we dine. What's the point? So if you'd like to dress up for the evenings. So I've taken my kilt with me, so I'll be lugging my kilt and jacket all around my camping spots and whatnot. But yeah, so I'm really, really curious about how it's going to turn out, who'll be there, what we're going to discuss,
Yeah.
and I'll report back to you guys.
Yes, I'm interested to hear. It goes back to one of our very first podcasts where we discussed what should sort of be taught in universities.
University.
And one of the things we got out of that was it's a bit of an issue of there is this sort of single-minded ideas that come out of universities, whether that be on the left or on the right. I guess it fluctuates throughout history. So I get on a surface level, it seems cool to sort of wanting to introduce a different sort of point of view into the universities and encourage debate rather than just, sticking to the norm. So, but I guess we'll see what it is. It sounds like you might be being indoctrinated into something, but
yeah, I don't know. I'm actually quite nervous.
but I'm sure you'll be fine.
I'm sure it'll be fine. Yeah.
Anyway.
So, and yeah, just a little bit more info for everyone. So, because we're doing this political origin story, I guess, of the two of us at the end, we won't be doing a what we've been reading and watching segment at the beginning. So I'll probably do a little spiel on my Rory Stewart experience next week.
Okay, yeah.
Because I needed to brew.
Yeah.
The old thing of never meet your heroes.
Quick thoughts. Did you have a good time?
Yeah, mostly.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the book here. Politics on the Edge by Rory Stewart. It's a chunky bad boy. But yeah, I mean, for people who don't know, Rory Stewart, I somewhat kind of idolize the man to something of a demigod, and his political philosophy and his ideas and his life, I find very central to my political philosophy and how I see the world and how I want to kind of my career to go. And so regardless of his views, regardless of what he was even talking about, just the fact of me seeing him on a stage, getting close to him, hearing him talk, that whole meeting your heroes kind of psychological complex. I mean, there was quite a lot of stuff going there, which, I mean, as a psychology student, I truly find quite interesting, Tiago.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll talk about that next week.
Talk about next week. Okay.
So the Republican primary debate, the first one we've had so far. I think it was in Arizona, wasn't it?
I believe so. Yes. I think it was. Did you watch it? Did you watch highlights? Did you just read about it? Let's.
Yeah. So I was just watching the highlights and did some research. I watched the highlights and I did some research into a few of the candidates, the important candidates in my eyes, and then also had a look at some of the polling numbers.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. What were your thoughts, Tiago?
Well, I as I said to you before we started recording, I watched maybe the first 10 minutes, and it kind of frustrated me to watch it. Not so much, their opinions or whatever. It was kind of it's a show. We've talked about it before. These debates in America, they're a performance, and it's all sponsored by Fox News, and you've got the Fox News presenters sitting there mediating, and it's all about roasting almost your opponents, and like who's more anti-woke, and who's for the betterment of the country, and who's got freaking supporters, donors in the audience, and all of that sort of thing. So after watching that, and it was kind of quite exhausting, I just went back and watched the highlights. Then I did some reading of some analysis, and it's interesting stuff, and it's definitely very entertaining. Shall we go through? Shall I give a little say like the order of where different candidates stand? Will?
With the polling?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
So
I have some numbers here, so it'll be interesting to see if we're the same or not. But yeah, go for it.
I haven't got specific numbers written down, but I've got the order. It might be interesting.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously up the top, we got Donald Trump, who, correct me if I'm wrong, Will, but I think he's leading by quite a bit in the polling.
Yeah. So actually, so what's happening here, right? So these are for people who don't know, and I actually didn't know myself. I was looking into this. This is all part of what we call in the US the primaries. So these numbers we're providing are how popular the presidential candidates are, specifically with the people who can vote for primaries throughout the US states. So from about now until the election, which occurs on November 5th, 2024, every single US state will have primaries, which then, so that the Republicans and the Democrats and whatnot within each state will vote in a different number of ways as to who they want to put forward to be either the Republican or Democrat nominee. So these numbers we're providing aren't actually like US-wide who wants to be the next president. It's state-specific who can vote in that state for who they want their state to choose to be president, to put forward as one of the options of president. And these are like Republican Party members. These are Democrat Party members. So if you want some numbers, Trump is currently polling at 50.3%, which is miles ahead of everyone.
Insane.
Yeah. Next is DeSantis. So DeSantis is currently on 14.8%.
Yep.
Which again, is nothing compared to Trump. And DeSantis, we'll get into this later, but he's rapidly going downhill and somewhat imploding.
Yeah.
And Ramaswamy, who I really want to talk to you a lot about Ramaswamy. He's a fascinating individual.
Yes, yeah.
He's currently on 9.2%, and he's rapidly rising. And then you've got Nikki Haley. I think she was on 3% or something, and you've got Mike Pence, and he was on 2%. But so really, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's a done deal unless something crazily goes wrong, unless some constitutional thing with these indictments makes it fully illegal for Trump to run.
Yeah.
I think he's personally got it in the bag.
Yes. It's interesting because it did look like for a moment that, as we said before, and we've talked about him a little bit on this podcast before, Ron DeSantis may have had a chance against Trump. But Trump has come out and openly, mocked DeSantis and called him names and sort of turned his fan base against him, which I think is has brought a lot of people who may have considered voting for DeSantis as a somewhat more moderate leader in the Republican Party back to Trump, because there is such loyalty to that man. Yeah, who knows?
Just a little bit on DeSantis. So for people who don't know, he's been the governor of Florida since 2018. And Florida, obviously, traditionally a swing state. But he's, I don't know, I feel like my accent goes more Australian when I keep my voice quiet. But anyway, Florida's traditionally a swing state, but he's definitely turning out more and more red, more Republican.
Definitely.
And with what you were saying there about Tiago, about him being a bit more of a moderate than Trump in the Republican sense, I thought this originally as well, but I actually am now really tending to disagree. I think he is as right-wing, if not more right-wing than Trump.
All right.
So to give you an example, he said that literally the woke go to die in Florida. That's, I mean, those are his words.
Yeah, I guess he's just less extravagant about it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, this brings me to my next point. That his whole sales pitch was that he will have the right-wing vigor of Trump, but he's more hardworking, he's more stable, he's more reliable. He'll keep out of the media. He'll just get on with the job. And I think originally that kind of appealed to people.
Yeah.
But now, I mean, people like Trump because exactly he is that. He is a showman. He is controversial. That is his golden ticket. So for DeSantis, he's kind of shot himself in the foot because he's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I've got these opinions on abortion, I've got these opinions on immigration, I've got these opinions on the Mexican border. And it's like, yeah, well, Trump's got all of that, but Trump's also got this pizzazz, and
Yeah.
you're trying to sell yourself on the fact that you don't have the pizzazz, but in reality, we want the pizzazz.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Um,
you listen to Donald Trump talk starting in mid 2015 when he was first sort of coming up with this whole presidential thing, and it's hard not to like him. You can disagree with everything he says, but he's got that charm and that showmanship that you want to laugh, and it's interesting to see that. Like, it's different. It's had been said a million times, but I wish that he was just a personality, so I could sit here and be like, oh yeah, I love him because he's funny. He knows what he's doing when it comes to talking to a crowd or addressing people or cracking jokes. But and as you said,
yeah.
that doesn't appeal to some people, which is where the DeSantis sort of figure comes in. But I mean, it clearly appeals to less people. Oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that whole you said he's a personality. He knows
Yeah.
how to get the crowd going. I mean
Mhm.
that's the again with this Roy Stewart event I was at last night. I mean that is the whole this whole thing of populism of
Yeah.
you know of not really believing in democracy of doing things around. And I mean Trump is that to the core. And so
Mhm.
when you have those showmanship figures and it starts to intermingle with politics, that's when you have this poisonous kind of populism coming through.
Mhm.
So it's interesting in that regard. So that's DeSantis.
Mhm.
Do we want to? I mean, so yeah, the other two contenders, which are kind of worth mentioning. There's a lady called Nikki Haley.
Yep.
She used to be the U.S. representative at the United Nations.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. What do you know much about her, Tiago? Do you have any
Um.
thoughts on her?
Well, she was obviously kind of running from the position of the mother and wife and
Yeah,
strong female leader with traditional values for the Republican Party. The problem was, and where a lot of people find that she's kind of weak in people that want that kind of aren't into Trump, and they kind of want her to call out some of the stuff Trump's doing, but she's playing it very safe in all aspects of things, but especially in the fact that she won't come out and say much of anything against Trump, which I think has turned a lot of people that
yeah,
were originally thinking, hey, she would be a good candidate, it would be a bit of a facelift for the Republicans.
yeah,
She's a
yeah.
little
For
bit
the
more
Republicans.
old school in her sort of Republican ideals. It's more like about
Yeah,
traditional values and that sort of stuff rather than this big fight on wokeism and what it's kind of turned into. But
yeah,
there's a few problems, and I think it kind of needs to be addressed. Uh, and it sounds super shallow, but we're talking about American politics here. The fact that she is a woman in the Republican Party probably does put her at a disadvantage. There is just sort of a bias there, and it's a bit of a boys' club, I guess you could say. But the other thing is, and I think this is the main thing, is she's kind of just weak on everything in a way that I feel like as a Republican you really can't be. Bowing
okay,
to kind of just along the exact line of what her donors want, and it's very transparent, and a lot of people can sort of see through it. So she would have been interesting, and honestly, if I was going to choose a candidate from this run of Republicans, I would probably have gone with her or looked into her a bit more.
okay,
But she's a little bit too weak, and it's a bit worrying if she's already bowing to things going into the election. Once she's
Al,
elected,
yeah,
how is she going to
yeah,
who's she going to bow to then? But yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, no, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that.
Mhm.
But without further ado, we'll get to the this writhing, interesting star of Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yes.
So interesting, fascinating chap. I'm a little bit, I don't know, I'm almost scared by him
Mm.
because I just don't really. It's just a force of nature, which I'm troubling me to understand where he is, where he comes from, what he stands for, and what he kind of means for the future of politics. Because I was
Mhm.
thinking, I was kind of thinking, is this the future of politics? This is like, because you look at him, he's kind of, it's as if Elon Musk has run for president, really.
Yeah.
I mean, so he's 38 years old. He's a biotech entrepreneur. He was a multimillionaire before he was 30. But then, you know, his parents came from a poor family in India. So he's got that, you know, rough and up and coming backstory. He's made it big in the US. He went to the Yale law school at Harvard. And so he's a very, very wealthy, entrepreneurial, technologically intelligent man. And now he's coming out with all of these quite, well, radical, you know, really some really quite radical policies.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing which I actually highly support is he wants to ban addictive social media for under 16-year-olds, which I think would be brilliant. But on the other hand, he wants to fully militarize the southern border with Mexico and put in the army to solve that border problem there. He wants to shut down the Department of Education. He wants to shut down the FBI. And he also wants to shut down the IRS, which is crazy. Another thing, he wants to raise the voting age to 25, from 18 to 25. But the interesting point here is if you're in between the ages of 18 to 25, you can vote if you do 6 months of national service or if you sit a civics test. I mean, this is the thing which really gets me, is surely with him as the youthful candidate, like interconnected with media and with technology and with the ideas of the future and everything, and you know, and the young, surely he should be the one trying to decrease the voting age, trying to like rejuvenate. But he's really putting in some quite conservative things. It's like, no, you kids, if you want to vote before the age of 25, you've got to show that you either understand the system or you really respect the country.
Yeah.
And for a young candidate to do that, I mean, that was it seems to be a genuinely politically kind of, I don't know, motivated in some kind of principle.
Yeah.
And then finally, he's got some interesting ideas about the police. One of which is to kind of reinvigorate the mental health institutions of the US and try to solve and face head on this mental health epidemic that, I mean, the Western world, quite frankly, is going through at the moment.
Yeah.
And sure, maybe the ideas behind that are a bit vague, but no other presidential candidate has been talking about that at all.
No.
And so he's fresh. He's got all these new ideas. Some of them are just crazy. Some of them seem to be based in decent chunks of reality. He's quite wealthy. But I suppose, as you saw on the debate stage, quite a lot of people were poking at him, saying you actually have no experience of being a politician.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what did you make of Vivek, Tiago?
He's an interesting one, and my sort of theory is, if there is not a Republican win in this election, I think he's going to come back with a bite in the next election, and he's going to put up a lot more of a fight, because I didn't see his name floating around until like a few weeks ago, to be honest. I don't know if that's the same for you.
He only launched his campaign really quite recently.
Yeah, so I think if he had a bit more time to get his messaging out, and obviously he can afford to get his messaging out. We're talking about the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. That's a big deal. I think he's
quite dodgy, like pharmaceutical companies in regards to government contracts and past employees and whatnot. But anyway,
but I think he's got some radical ideas, but I think they make a lot of intuitive sense to a lot of people. And if you're looking for that next, if we're in the need of someone who's, a strong leader, who's got big ideas, that's kind of what I feel like the world is kind of craving at the moment. Someone a bit younger as well, as we've talked about. We've got all these, I think, he's in for a chance. The only thing that I think might hurt him is, as you say, he's not really at all pandering to the younger voter, and I think that a lot of older voters are going to be turned off by his age, if that makes sense to you. The fact that he is so young.
I don't know. I was I was watching a few of his caucus events when he's been speaking in town halls, and he seems to be able to appeal to a very, very large base, surprisingly, old
really?
and young.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. I think about the whole thing about raising the voting age. I think he actually still will appeal to the youth far more than any other Republican candidate probably ever will. Yeah, and in regards to him coming back with a bite, I mean, it'll be fascinating to what he does in his future. Because again, he is only 38. He's got plenty of years left. He's got tons and tons of cash. And yeah, and because I mean, well, the other point I wanted to make is, with him coming back, he's a very big Trump supporter. So he's repetitively he endorsed Trump back in 2020. I think in the debate he called Trump best president of the 21st century. When they were like, who would support Trump even if he was successfully indicted? When they asked that, he was one of the first to put his hands up. And so I mean the theory is, I mean, some people, I'm not sure if you've heard this theory, Tiago, but some people is like Trump wins and then Vivek is his VP, is his vice president.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which, I mean, you think about that, it's such an odd mix of people. It's like the old businessman, showman, big white kind of traditional, Republican man, and then you've got like this young entrepreneurial Indian connection. I mean, it's such a mix of worlds. And there's even I was listening to one commentator who was like, if Trump was successfully indicted or if there was some constitutional reason that he had to pull out of the race, a vast majority of Trump supporters would go to Vivek, and Vivek would pull far ahead of DeSantis. And then you'd have like Biden versus Vivek. But then there's another point here which I want to make, which with what you just said made it tick for me, is that even if Trump does win this next term, that's his 2 terms gone.
Oh, true.
And then Trump retires and all of Trump's base, and so let's say Trump does this term, Vivek is VP, Trump retires at the end, all of Trump's supporters then go to Vivek, and suddenly it's an heir to the throne. It's passing on the baton. And again, with what you were saying about there needing to be some youth, this is exactly what we were talking about with Trump and Biden. They're both really quite old. And they're both getting tired, and especially Biden, who's in he's in his 80s now. It'll be quite something. So watch this space and watch this Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, just a final thought on him. It was interesting watching the debate, specifically in the highlights. The other Republican candidates, they do not like him pretty much at all. But a lot of their attacks, and this could just be a result of such a showman, superficial debating scene that we have around the presidential elections in the US. But all of their attacks on them didn't seem to really be around policy. It was around, as you were saying before, the fact he hasn't been in politics, doesn't know what he's talking about. It was on they said one of the things was he talks like ChatGPT. I thought he was a pretty good, like not terrible. I thought DeSantis is, when he was speaking,
he was very awkward.
Was really awkward. I didn't find that with him, but yeah. And then the other thing, like 3 times they compared him to Obama. And I was scratching my head. I was like, where is this coming from?
Did
they? Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting, the sort of route that they're taking to attack him. But I don't know. As you said, this will be an interesting one to watch. So keep that in mind.
And again, with the whole attacking him for no political experience, no past briefs, he wasn't in Congress, he wasn't in the Senate, neither was Trump.
True.
It's the same thing, It's a businessman.
And that would appeal to a lot of people if we're being
Yeah.
honest. Yeah.
Obviously, it has.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Trump, was able to get some of the largest turnouts in U.S. presidential
Yeah.
history.
Oh boy.
So that's a fascinating combination. But as we move on to kind of close on this Republican thing, I don't know. Overall, it was pretty depressing stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we're kind of jollily talking about all the candidates here, but I mean, I don't know. It was just the Republicans in the U.S. seem to have gone into this mindset that the more extreme they go, the more polarizing they become, the more they talk about this woke establishment, the more they use those buzzwords, the more they can anger their base, the more votes they can get. And in this kind of capitalist-infused U.S. kind of system, the more they rile that up, the better they'll get. And I just it's horrifying because it quite frankly pushes people to political extremes.
Yeah.
And you could see this throughout the debate.
Well, yeah, and I think not only does it push a lot of people to extremes, it pushes a lot of people out because they look at it and they look, that's politics. This is exhausting. I don't care. When those people have a sort of right to be involved and probably have good ideas, but they're never going to be expressed and they're never going to talk about it because why would you want to get involved in that, really? But yeah, that's a good. I completely agree with you. Well, that's a good closing statement for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk about the Ukraine, or is there something else you wanted to say with the?
No. Yeah, okay. We'll get on to Ukraine. So again, I'll throw a few things at you and see what your views are. But for those who don't know, I suppose for those who don't know, warfare actually revolves a lot around the seasons. so and this is quite simply because it's difficult to operate a massive outdoor logistical operation during winter, especially when you're in Europe. I don't know why I'm suddenly going on this very abstract militaristic strategic talk, but we'll go with it. So you look at Napoleon in Russia, you look at Hitler in Russia, and now again Ukraine and Russia. The winter is a terrible, terrible time to fight a war. So more or less, my point is, it was summer recently, and the Ukrainians were going to do this big counteroffensive. They'd been saving up all of this Western equipment. They had Challenger tanks from Britain. They had Leopard tanks from Germany. They had all these new surface-to-air missiles. The whole shebang. They had all this equipment, and they were going to do this big counteroffensive. And it seems that since kind of mid-June when this counteroffensive took off, nothing really seems to have happened much. It all seems to have, I don't know, kind of mediocrely kind of gone along. And I was looking at some maps to the BBC. If you ever want to look at some really good, down-to-earth, just simple maps of the current state of the war in Ukraine, the BBC are often updating kind of mapping program which provides really accurate information. So I was looking at these maps, and in the southern region of Zaporizhzhia, since the mid of June, the Ukrainians haven't even really pushed the Russians back by anything more than 20 kilometers, which is really not that much at all.
Yeah.
They're, in this idea of the whole great push kind of thing, it hasn't been as successful as I think the West was hoping it would be. But in the last few days, and in fact, maybe even in the last 24 hours, there have been some rumors of quite important military successes. So we've got this region of Zaporizhzhia, which is in southern Ukraine, and so you've got the Crimean Peninsula, and then you've got Zaporizhzhia above it, and then in between both of them, to the east of the Sea of Azov. The Ukrainians are trying to. There's Russian troops in this region. The Ukrainians are trying to make a beeline to the Sea of Azov to cut off these Russian troops and then to eventually get to the Crimean Peninsula. And in order to do this, there's some strategic points they need to take, obviously. And one of these is the small village, really, of Robertine, which I'm probably pronouncing incorrectly, but there you are. And more or less in the last 24, 48 hours, the Ukrainians have successfully taken this town, this village. And this village then leads to a town called Tokmak. And Tokmak is a very important railway hub, an intersecting link of lots of railway lines which the Russians are using to transport logistics around the southern Ukrainian region. So once they've taken Robotyne, they can try and get on to Tokmak. But I mean, it's great and all, and it's like, very good. But the problem is, as I was saying before, the seasons are coming along, and we're into September now. October's not that far away. Autumn's just around the corner, and autumn in Ukraine brings a large amount of rain, and then you get the mud, and winter's bad, but muddy, wet, weather is even worse because tanks, trucks, vehicles, supplies, ambulances, everything just grinds to a halt in that kind of thing. So you've got this, you've got this kind of small gains in the south, and everyone I was watching was kind of pointing this as here we go, the big push. But then, and I'm curious to hear what you've heard about this in regards to Western media reportage. But in the north, the Ukrainians are actually still losing ground to the Russians. And so this is in the Kharkiv region. 12,000 Ukrainians have just been asked to evacuate from a major city 40 kilometers from the Russian-Ukrainian border. The Ukrainian government asked them to evacuate, and that's in the northern Kharkiv region. So it's like, sure, you're making these small gains in the south, but in the north, things are not going very well. The Russians are still pushing. And so overall, it just, it seems like a very mediocre, not great picture for anyone, really. And you can see it. The Ukrainian leaders are getting quite snappy. So at bilateral meetings and conferences, Zelensky has been continuously like, no, the push is going successful, and calling for more support and getting angry at kind of Western officials talking down the counteroffensive. And there was actually a video of the Ukrainian foreign minister recently. I think he literally called people. He said they were stupid. He was like, people who were suggesting the counteroffensive isn't going well, they're stupid. They need to go away or whatever. So it's a very touchy subject.
Yeah.
But yeah, there you are. I don't know. I mean, do you have any?
Well, this is just I haven't been really following that closely as of recent. But I do remember was it June, July, earlier in the year anyway, there was this talk about, this is the final push. We've got support from foreign aid and all that sort of stuff, and we've got everything, and then we're going to go. And it was all in the media, and everyone was talking about it again. The Ukraine war seems to come and go in relevance, very sadly, but I guess that's just the nature of the 24-hour news cycle. But and then kind of radio silence after that, after it had begun, and all that you would kind of hear is like, they've gained a little bit of ground here and lost a little bit of ground there, and it's just kind of this back and forth. And I'd be interested in knowing this from you. Has Ukraine slowed since then? Has Russia gone harder? Have they actually been doing a little bit better? But it seems to me that they put all these resources into something, and when they were doing, not great, they were still being, greatly outnumbered and outgunned and all that. But they, from what the media sort of said, they were doing better before this big push. I don't know, Will, what would you say to that?
I don't think. I think before June, nothing was really happening. It was just a stagnant stalemate of the two sides. Russia was digging in, and Ukraine was arming up. So I would say yes, Ukraine is definitely doing better now, but they're not doing as better as they thought they would.
Right.
And if you look at the north, the Russians are pushing themselves, and so it almost counters the gains that the Ukraine's making south.
Okay.
I've got some numbers as well, which kind of blew my mind, which I could throw at you. So Ukraine doesn't publish any of its own statistics, obviously for security reasons. But some U.S. officials, diplomatic officials, leaked or kind of informed these to the New York Times. So apparently, so far, and this is quite sad, there have been 70,000 Ukrainians killed in the war in so far, and there's been 100,000 to 120,000 wounded. And then the Russians are quite a bit more, so the Russians have 120,000 killed, and they have 170,000 to 180,000 wounded. And at the moment, these are just numbers, right? But get this. So so Ukraine has currently lost 70,000 killed. In the 2 decades of Vietnam, guess how many Americans were killed?
I don't know.
58,000.
Jesus Christ. Wow.
So Ukraine has already far exceeded the 2 decades of Vietnam. And that really hammers home the death toll here. And, and Vietnam, I mean, man, that holds such a poignant position within U.S. military history and the U.S. national psyche. And the campus protest against the war and the kind of hippie movement against it and all of that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, Ukrainians have far exceeded that death toll already within less than 2 years or whatever. It's in what the US did in 2 decades.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, and I mean, obviously, the outcome of this war will definitely determine it. But how we're going to look back on this in 20 or 30 years' time? Is it going to be something that we remember as much as Vietnam or something like that? And I guess that's dependent on a few things. How much longer is this going to go for? Are we looking at another year? Are we looking at another 10 years?
No, definitely another year.
And then I guess the other thing is, does this expand from here? Are we just looking at Ukraine? Is this going to be like a sort of a falling domino that sets a bunch of other things in motion? And yeah, I don't know, man. It's going to be something to look back on. I'm really curious to see what the legacy of this war is going to be.
Yeah, the legacy will be fascinating. I think we're in for definitely a few more. Well, so here we go, back to the Republican thing. If the US pulls out of support for Ukraine, that will drastically affect Ukrainians' fighting potential.
Yeah.
So the way I'm looking at it is the Russians are being drained. Their equipment is substandard. They're running out of troops. They're having massive number of casualties. But at the same time, the Ukrainians are getting drained, and there's a possibility of the Republicans coming in, pulling out of support, the whole Western kind of backing of Ukraine pulling out. It's like both sides are being brought down. And it is in the strategic, down-to-earth, militaristic side of things, it's a very stagnant style of more or less brutal trench warfare that the Russians kind of defending themselves with. Tank traps, mines, trenches. I think Ukraine is now sadly the most mined country in the world within a year and a bit of war. So yeah, I'm also really interested in Zelensky and to how he is going to continue as an individual after the war and what happens to him. We should maybe do another episode where we kind of really dig into him as a character, because do you know much about him?
But didn't he start as like a TV host or a comedian or something like that?
No. Yeah. So he was a Ukrainian TV comedian, as an acting comedian, and he actually played president of Ukraine in a TV show.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So he played this character who was a teacher who, as a joke, ran to be president of Ukraine and won. And now in real life, comedian ran to be president of Ukraine on like a vague kind of anti-corruption ticket, and he won.
Yeah. And now
then he was just kind of getting on with the job, and now he's been propelled into like this, Churchillian kind of militaristic, flying around the world, gathering support, trying to keep his country going in the darkest of hours. So it'll be interesting to see whichever way this war goes, how if Ukraine holds on to territory, if he stays on, if he forms some kind of cult of personality, it'll be interesting.
It does seem to me.
So yeah.
at least from a point of view of someone who's not in the Ukraine. But that public sentiment has dropped a little bit for him over the past few months. I don't know exactly why. I think part of it
Okay.
is the fact that a lot of people in America aren't happy that there's support in there, and they're sort of over him continually, asking for support and that sort of thing. But I
Yeah.
guess he's just got to do what he can do. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I
I
guess
don't
so.
know. Yeah, but that would be, yeah, definitely be interesting to look into him, where his support lies, his proper look at it, how he came up, and what things are going to look like after this is all said and done. Yeah.
Which could be years from now.
Yes.
But anyway, should we move on to perhaps a lighter topic?
Yes, we shall. So, I was just thinking, we've ended off the last few podcasts on a slightly depressing note about the fate of the world and whatnot. I thought, why don't we bring things back a little bit? Let's, land the alien spaceship for a second, and let's talk about how we specifically got into politics. I think we've touched on, why we swing certain ways, maybe in our first episode, if you want to go back and listen to that. But I don't think we've extensively discussed, like, what sort of things got us there, where our interests came from, and, we'll talk about some of our influences, some books that you might want to read, some, that sort of thing. So, Will, would you like to start with that?
Well, I mean, I've just been talking about Ukraine quite a bit.
Okay.
Do you wanna kind of start us off?
Yeah. Okay. Well, if I was to really think about where my interest in politics came from, it came from a few things. The first time I really remember sort of being switched on to the ideas of politics, especially in Australia, was in 2013, I believe. There was
Oh,
the Labor leadership spill in Australia. If I think it was
yeah.
2013, and I just remember that was the first time that anything sort of political came into my world, that I was thinking about it at all. You had the infighting with Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, and then on the other side you had Tony Abbott, and that was the first time I remember like sort of paying attention to what was happening in the news and that sort of thing. And then, with that running in the back of my mind, I remember a few years after, my dad would always have Triple J on in the car, and not that it's the most reliable or unbiased source of news, but he'd always have Hack playing. If anyone's aware of Hack, it's a it's like a fun news, current affairs sort of radio show that used to be hosted by a guy called Tom Tilley, and I remember for the first time being properly engaged in what was being said and showing a real interest. Now, this was around the time of actually Trump first entering the presidential race in 2015, and I remember that.
2016.
Well, he was voted in
Oh,
2016.
when
Yeah, yeah, wait, yeah,
apologies.
yeah,
I
yeah.
see.
And like it was exciting, and I think it may have damaged me slightly having that be my real proper introduction to politics. This this sort of sensationalized thing and this big divisive thing. But I remember being so interesting, and it gave me also an insight into the fact that, well, maybe both of these sides aren't great, but one's kind of better than the other, and everyone was talking about it, and people of all ages were against Trump or mega for Trump or all this sort of thing. And then from that being guided in and being again switched on a couple of years later when we had the what was it, the postal ballot for the rights for gay marriage in Australia, that again once again
and the other side.
yeah sort of triggered the thinking about politics again, and interesting to see how a bill can go from a simple sort of thing that you put through a parliament to this widely debated thing where you're posting out things to people.
So when did you? So those are kind of like the first little, sticking up through the fold kind of things.
Yeah.
But when did you really start kind of, checking the news regularly, or when did you start kind of going out of your way to look to consume political information and
Well,
political news?
I would say after that, which is when I sort of started, as you said, looking into
Okay.
the news, reading the
So
ABC.
after the plebiscite,
Yeah.
the gay marriage. Oh, okay, that's interesting.
And I sort of, from that moment, I really swung from real left to really right, as I think a lot of people do. At one stage, listening to, Hack and Triple J and that sort of thing, to the other side of like, your Ben Shapiro's, and to a lesser degree,
Wait, you swung.
I swung a
You
lot.
swung right.
Yeah, I swung right. I swung left. I swung right. I swung left, and then I was kind of where I am now. But which is
Oh.
interesting.
Wait,
And
wait. So hold on.
Yeah.
This is fascinating. What do you mean I never realized this happened. So when did this right swing happen, and why did it happen?
So I'd say probably around, oh my gosh, I don't know. It's been a long time.
Well, so postal plebiscite was like 2018.
2018, yeah. And I was never.
So then what?
2019,
2019,
late 2019. Yeah, that would make sense. Well, I think, and this happens a lot of, I was going through some sort of vague mental health issues and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of people, especially younger men, when they're lost, those ideas that the right puts out, they're so appealing, whether they're right or wrong or whatever, it doesn't matter. But a sort of seething dislike for progressive ideas, like kind of feeling attacked by ideas of like feminism and that sort of thing. And it's something I identified with as someone who I thought I was a pretty decent person, but a lot of the time I did feel like I was sort of under attack, as obviously I was a teenager and everything's a lot more dramatic than it actually is, but that's how it felt to a certain extent. And then moving from that, I once I sort of started to get a little bit older and even more switched into politics, not just listening to like one show or anything like that. This is around the time that I was first introduced myself to Friendly Geordies, who I still listen to now and I still have great supporter for. Kind of this swing back to the sort of middle, or the center left, I guess you would call it, where it's like, okay, that there are certain things on the right that are interesting, and I don't know if I agree with them, but I see the value in them, and there's certain things on the left. And this is when I sort of became disliking of identity politics and pop politics and that sort of thing, and became more interested in, okay, what does a political system look like? How do we, what's best for the great amount of people? We don't need to sit with an ideology per se. We more need to sit with policy. And that's kind of where I am today. I've some books that I've read, one that Will gave me, and actually Will was a big, Will and I sort of started talking properly about politics a few years ago, and that was a big sort of force for me to look into things as well, because Will's been interested in politics longer than I have in a serious sort of way, and he was obviously a very good friend of mine, and talking to him, getting a different perspective than I may have otherwise, and it was a really cool thing to do. So if you've got friends that are involved in politics at all, even if they would not agree with you, I think it's have a good, honest, non-confrontational conversation with them, and it can really do you a lot of good. But anyway, back to sort of recommendations. I haven't read the book, but I've seen the documentary of Manufacturing Consent, which is about sort of the Western propaganda model, which I think is really good.
Is that's not Chomsky, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Again, whether you sort of agree with what's in it or disagree with what's in it, it's definitely interesting and kind of eye-opening and sort of a fresher sort of thing.
What is the central thesis of that book? So
it's basically, and it's been a while since I watched the documentary, which as I'm aware, is pretty much the same as the book. So this idea that you've been conditioned over your lifestyle to believe in these Western values, when they might not always be exactly.
Be that good. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Just
again,
the classic intellectual lefty going
yeah,
after
yeah,
the.
definitely.
Yeah,
But yeah,
but that's
going off that,
Chomsky down to the T.
yeah, Noam Chomsky is quite a bit of an influence of mine. Again, I don't think I should have to say this for anyone, but I don't agree with everything he said. Just take that, whoever I'm talking about. Um, I read a couple books, starting with Will getting me onto, well, not getting me onto, I don't think he's read it, but he gave me a book about China by, what's his name? Kevin Rudd, our ex-Prime
Kevin
Minister.
Rudd.
So he's another big one. And then obviously you've got, Friendly Jordies, of course, which I think the biggest thing for me with him is I'm always sort of surprised at what he has to say about things. He always offers a bit of a different perspective, and love him or hate him, that's a cool thing that I look for in politics. And then I'm sure you're going to, yeah, go on.
Well, no, I was just saying, I'm impressed with Friendly Jordies in the way that he really gets down to earth with the nitty gritty technical side
Yeah,
of policy and of ideas and of statistics and the ins and outs. Like he can flirt and fluctuate between the grand philosophical ideas and visions and direction, but
yeah,
he can also get really down to earth and into the nitty gritty of the
yeah,
detail.
hmm
And he does it really well
in a
and he
digestible
communicates it
way.
really
Yeah.
well in a digestible way. Yeah, I'm really quite impressed, and he's an incredibly intelligent individual as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then, yeah, as I was going to say, the final thing, which I was introduced to these characters in a very long road trip with Will at the end of last year, is the Rest is Politics podcast with Rory Stewart and, oh my God, I'm terrible with that. What's his?
Alistair Campbell.
Yep, Alistair Campbell. And that's been a great thing. Again, another perspective that you can get from two people that often have differing opinions on things, but they keep it polite, and it's not a big American presidential debate. And no, it's good. So anyway, Will, let's hear about your rise to where you are now.
That was very interesting. I didn't realize you had that little right wing back in 2019 or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, again, we talked about this a little bit in the first episode, but actually no, well, because you're kind of as you said, Terry, you're more center left. But again, to come back to you, where does that interest in politics come from? Are you trying to better the people? Is there a respect for the country? Is it like what is that drive that kind of pins you to the center left and the betterment of people rather than perhaps the center right?
I think it almost is out of a frustration. And that sounds kind of bad, just face off, but I think that when it comes down to it, the actual policy and the actual ideas that are being put forward by the center left, they seem like, to me personally, they are the better ideas. They are helping the people that most need the help, and people that don't need the help, they're sort of giving back in a way. And I think coming from, obviously I've only just started like youth working and that sort of thing, you see people that couldn't help themselves, as terrible as that sounds, because of they've never gone to school, their parents have abandoned them, that sort of thing. And then you in the center left sort of says, okay, well, we come from a place of privilege, let's help them out. Whereas the right, and I've always sort of felt a bit weird about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Obviously, that applies for some people, but I think that the idea of let's bring ourselves down to help others, which is what I kind of see as the central thesis of it, is a more productive sort of messaging. But I don't know if you would disagree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, because I mean, old Thatcher's, she's literally says the opposite. You have to bring people up.
Yeah.
Not take the top down. No, okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So in regards to myself, I think I've said this before. I have a deep love of history. I have a deep love of history, and I have a deep love of the nation of Britain. And this all sounds very nostalgic and romantic and perhaps airy fairy, but it is central to my whole political philosophy. So I'm not gonna shove it away, because too many people do that these days. So I love history. I love the nation of Britain. Growing up, I don't really know where it came from, because my father and my mother were never too politically engaged. I mean, politics would kind of sometimes come up in conversation when I was growing up. I wouldn't say not any more than the average kind of middle class suburban family. And again, my love of history. My father was a little bit. He would kind of encourage me in that regard, but it was my own interest. And so, from a very young age, I was looking into history books, European history, military history, the Napoleonic Wars, the Second World War, the First World War, the U.S. Civil War. I really quite like military history starting off, and all of that stuff. And then it must have been around. I think the thing which did it for me was Brexit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So Brexit came at a point. So 2016, I was in year 7 at school, and I actually remember the day that the referendum happened. I can remember where I was. The PE changing block nearest to that big flight of stairs down to the Oval. I was walking past there. I was walking home. And remember my form teacher, Mr. Brown?
Oh, of course.
But like the skinny science guy, he I passed him, and I saw the referendum result, and I remember telling him, Brexit has happened, Britain's left the EU, and he was a funny guy. I think he was quite fond of Trump. Anyway,
really?
He was really happy that Brexit had happened, and he thought it was a brilliant thing. Anyway, that's regardless of all that. The point was that Brexit was occurring during a formative period of my development. And so I loved history. I loved Britain. I loved the historical state of Britain. So I must have been like, okay, well, part of it was through the history. I was looking into people like Churchill. I was looking people into like Prime Minister William Pitt. I was looking into the history of Disraeli and Gladstone, and then like politics and that history goes hand in hand. I started to look into that political sense, and then there was the current, present political changes, and that would have been Brexit. And I mean, you only, if you're interested in politics, I mean, with the 24-hour news cycle, you could just tap into that Brexit drug, and oh boy, it supported you for 3 years. So I really, growing up, I suppose you were quite young as well, as you were discovering things. I was quite young as well. All these ideas about like a customs union and the single market, the Maastricht Treaty, and the European Parliament and the House of Commons and Theresa May, and then there was, David Cameron resigned and Theresa May came in, and then Theresa May resigned and Boris Johnson came in, and Boris Johnson resigned, and obviously the disaster of Liz Truss and leadership spill after leadership spill, and the ins and outs, and that kind of the last, Brexit onwards of British politics has just been so hyper active and so ins and outs and ups and downs, and I think it was just at that formative development point where I must have just hooked into it and just started to consume it all, and that was fully linked with that history. So that's why, and I have now moved to Britain from Australia. I love Australia, deep respect for Australia. Australian politics is fascinating. It's very interesting. I think their level of federalisation is quite interesting and could be exported to other countries. But regardless of all that, my heart kind of lies within Britain. So I have moved to Britain, so that's me trying to come to grips with the history and the politics and the identity of the nation. And so if you take that, oddly enough, well, not oddly, I suppose, quite commonsensely, it has swung me more in the center-right kind of way. And Tiago and I have talked about this before, but it's fascinating how you can look at the psychology of it, and the center left and the left and whatnot. It's about bringing people up. It's about changing, obviously, progressing things. It's about supporting people. It's a very empathetic, deeply motivated by action and justice and social improvement and mobility and all of those big kind of moving things. And I'm fully supportive of that and think it's brilliant. But my love of history, my love of culture, my love of tradition, that has kind of put me onto the other side where I'm more, well, quite frankly, I'm more stagnant. I'm more of a kind of balancing thing of, let's look into the nation's history, let's look into the nation's culture, let's preserve these things, let's hold together these institutions, let's respect these institutions. Maybe let's slow down a little bit with the progressive reforms we've got there. In regards to the economic side of things, economics is interesting. I mean, you were kind of saying, you believe in bringing people down and perhaps trying to help the lower people. I really need to do some proper reading into economics to fully grasp where I stand on them, because at the moment, I feel I genuinely don't know enough about Western economic models in countries and the statistics of tax and spend and all that stuff to really make a view. So I've kind of currently have some kind of vague center-right economics. So I would more say we need a basic safety net, but we should encourage people. I am more of the bootstrapped kind of person myself, I think. But then again, it's everything in balance.
Of course.
And this is the thing which I think the Western world is getting wrong these days. It's not about the right winning. It's not about the left winning. It's about it's not about one side being objectively right. It's about a consensus between them. It's about the left being in power for 10 years. It's about them putting the budget into a bit of difficulty. So then the right comes in for maybe 5 years. And then maybe there's a war or something. So a different party has to come in. It's about the fluctuations to adapt to the current political situations. It's not about objectively right policy. And I think that's where people who like Democrats who think that Republicans are genuinely evil, and Republicans who think that Democrats are like lunatic communists who want to destroy the country. It's like, no, you need, first of all, that's wrong in both regards, but you need both of them for the country to function.
We've I don't know if Well,
no, what were you going to say?
I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast. We definitely have in person. It's the idea of, and you've said it, you put it really well, of the left pushes things forward and the right sort of checks that along the way, in a way, to make sure. And you can't really have one without the other. Otherwise, we're either never going to get anywhere or we're going to go places that we really shouldn't. It's,
have you heard of my tree and clouds analogy? I think I did it before.
Maybe. Remind me.
So this is deep into my kind of weird political philosophy world, but I came up with this analogy that, because of this idea of balance and the two sides being, we need both sides. In my eyes, clouds are the most purest kind of representative form of the progressive, and trees are the most purest, beautiful form of conservatism. So clouds are always moving, they're always changing, the particles are always dispersing, they're contracting, and they're these beautiful white fluffy things that dance throughout the sky, and it brings movement and joy and interest. And to me, that's what the kind of the greatest liberal progressive kind of ideal you can reach. And then conservatives to me are trees. I mean, in their purest, most beautiful form, they're stalwart, they're strong, they take time, they become old, they become aged, they're deeply rooted, and it takes a large storm to destroy it or whatnot. And then the clouds water. I'm now just going off on this, but the clouds rain, and then it feeds the trees, and then the trees release things into the atmosphere, which then form the cloud. And it's a very holistic. I mean, I'm kind of like some crazy hippie, but I have a deep holistic idea in how these things should work, and there you are. So
I like that a lot. Yeah,
I
that's
mean, it's trees and clouds, liberals, progressives, and conservatives. And I mean, you go to a Republican or you go to a Democrat, and you tell them that, and I don't know, it would just that's what people need to be told these days, I feel. I might expand on that a little bit later in another episode, but I did want to get to a few books I could recommend.
Of course. Yeah.
Because we are running out of time here. Yeah. So the kind of fundamental text in conservatism is written by a man called Edmund Burke, who was a philosopher and a parliamentarian of the late 1700s. It's called Reflections on the Revolution in France. So modern conservatism can kind of be rooted back to this guy. Reflections of the Revolution in France, published in 1790, is more or less a bunch of essays of him saying the French Revolution is bad. We didn't need to do that. And obviously, French Revolution was this big liberal progressive, thing which historians debate, but a lot of people think it went quite too far. And he was the first guy to go, stop. We don't need to progress that far. Hold on to the traditions, the institutions, and your country will be more stable. So that's Edmund Burke. Further on from that, in a more contemporary sense, you've got a guy called Roger Scruton. So Roger Scruton was an English academic intellectual who was one of the very few genuinely small-c conservative intellectuals of Britain in the 21st century. He died in 2020, so he died quite recently. But a lot of my philosophical conservatism is deeply rooted in his ideas and his philosophy of about slow progressive change, of about believing in the institutions and the tradition and culture and all that stuff, which I've already explained. But he's got a book called How to Be a Conservative. I haven't read it, unfortunately, but to me it seems like a very down-to-earth, simple explanation of the philosophy. And then if you want to go a bit grander, a bit more intellectual, he's got a book called The Invitation to the Great Tradition, which I think is his great history of conservative intellectual thought. And to kind of wrap things up, the founder of the supposed founder, again, historians disagree, but the supposed founder of my political kind of conservatism is this guy called Benjamin Disraeli, who I've mentioned before. He was British Prime Minister twice, obviously a conservative Prime Minister, and he formed this idea of one nation conservatism, so bringing the poor and the rich together to form the one nation of Britain. And he had this idea that within the different classes, people could feel contentment. It wasn't about the lower class rising up and overpowering the upper class. It was about the upper class respecting the lower class, and the lower class respecting the upper class, and them being content in their roles. And he has this beautiful quote called, and it goes something along the lines of, if the cottage is unhappy, then the palace is unsafe. So this idea that if the down-to-earth average worker is feeling angry and wants a revolution, then the higher powers, the aristocrats, are unsafe in their castles. And look at the French Revolution, and boy was the cottage unhappy, and boy was the palace unsafe. So he believes in that idea, and so that, I mean, so yeah, you look at Disraeli. He was a novelist. He's a fascinating guy, but he wrote a trilogy of books called Coningsby, Sybil, and then Tancred. And within these three novels, you've kind of got social mobility and you've got aristocrats and whatnot, but he more or less plans out his political philosophy within these three novels. So if you want to go after them, you can do that as well. But again, the whole thing is the people being content in their classes is why I'm so anti-Marxism, anti-class anger, class resentment. I think you can find contentment within your class, and I'm a deep believer in hierarchy, and I think hierarchy is needed. for the stability of society. So there you are.
Cool. Well, for that podcast went a lot better than I thought, if I'm completely honest.
Yeah.
It was a
And
good one,
honestly,
actually.
Yeah.
I quite enjoyed that.
Yeah, very good. So there you are, guys. Thank you very much for listening.
If you enjoyed, as we say every week, subscribe, Instagram, all that good stuff, or bad stuff. You know, it's up to you. And we'll see you next week. I'm not sure what we're talking about yet. We will get to the voice soon. That's because we need to, because the boat's coming up. So enjoy your week.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn that turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq. Of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.